Hello, hello. Welcome to More Influence and Impact, the show that unlocks the secrets of success for multi, six, and seven-figure entrepreneurs. I am your host, Celia Faye Meisel, sales growth consultant, and I'm here to help you tap into the wealth of knowledge, strategies, and experiences of today's most influential industry leaders. And I am going to bring up my guest today, Ruha. Hello, Ruha.
Hello.
So excited to have you. And Ruha is a brand strategist and website designer. She's the founder of the Designist Studio, and she is here to help more business owners feel confident showing up as the face of their brand by being uniquely themselves. And that includes even if they feel like introverts, so that they can build their authority, grow their audience, and consistently attract their best fit clients. And this is such important stuff because growing a business, especially in the online space, there needs to be that mix of strategy, but also having that personal brand and being uniquely yourself. So, how did you find yourself getting into this and like really honing in on this part of entrepreneurship and this part of expertise to help others grow their business with branding?
When I started my business, I did not even realize this was an issue that people were facing. Even though I come from a background of retail management, retail has its own set of issues when it comes to branding. But I started my business as a way to help more online businesses, more businesses get online,
Okay.
especially as just dealing with the consequences of the pandemic.
Uh-huh.
And very quickly found that many people were feeling confused about their messaging. They weren't sure if they were speaking to the right people. There was just a lot, especially once we all moved online, there was so much noise around us that it was very easy to fall into the trap of comparison, comparing yourself to people who might be your competitors, just looking at everyone else around you and then losing sight of who you are and what you want to solve, and really the impact that you want to create for your clients. And so I realized there was a gap there that I could help solve, um, and very quickly found myself helping people with that, and particularly business coaches and consultants who are trying to create a larger impact. I think we come into our businesses wanting to create a life for ourselves that makes a lot more sense for us, but also because we want to help other people. And the best way to do that is to start getting in front of more people and helping them recognize that you are the right solution for them.
Yes, and there is an art and science to it. It's not just putting up a couple posts and calling it a day, or going into Canva and designing some graphics and picking brand colors. And I think that's what a lot of people think it is, that it's, posts and brand colors, but there's actually there should actually be some strategy and some intention behind it. And so what are some of those foundational elements that you like to look inside of businesses and see that they have in place in order to grow and be successful online?
I think if you've been in business for a while and you have been getting clients, it actually does make it a little easier. It can feel, when you're so close to your business, it can feel confusing. It can feel a bit overwhelming, but you have so much data behind you now at this point, and a lot of experience and insights that you can leverage to build a brand that creates this strong emotional connection with your clients. You know what's already connecting and you know what's not, and so you're able to leverage that information. Typically, when I'm talking to clients about um, figuring out really refining their brand strategy, we're still going back to basics, like what's the mission and what's the impact that you want to create. What are your values? How are those values impacting how you operate in your business? How is it going to show up in your those are in the details of your business, like your contracts and your communications with clients. And on a bigger scale, I think we think of brand strategy showing up in marketing a lot of the time. And so how do your emails sound? How does it reflect in your podcast? But fun, start with your foundations. What What are you trying to create? What's the impact that you're trying to create? What's the solution that you're offering?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you want to be perceived? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's still some sense of, you can't control how people are looking at you and how they're going to feel about you, but you can control how you're putting yourself out there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. And so that there's that intentionality behind it. I was just having a conversation with a client last week because you had mentioned like, that the brand is aligned with like your emails and the brand voice and everything. And I was having a conversation with a client last week, and this really goes into sales process because one thing that I look at with clients when they're getting ready to start to scale and say they're starting to bring on sales reps, we'll look and make sure that we want those sales reps to show up as themselves and be authentic
Mm-hmm.
to themselves, but also show up in alignment with the brand. And so if the brand has a little bit more of a bold, edgy side, like a sales rep trying to be too nice and people pleasing is going to be out of alignment. And so we were talking about that in the sales training process that your sales reps really need to give themselves permissions to step into that energy and
Mm-hmm.
step into that boldness. Because in this case, like the client has a little bit more of an edgy, bold brand. So it
Yeah.
does come through in all areas of the business, and from the front end client acquisition all the way through the customer journey inside of the company and continuing on. I heard you mention like with contracts and agreements as well, that everything is in congruence with that, with the brand.
Mm-hmm. Um, there are a couple of things I see with businesses that are growing.
Mhm.
The and you might experience one or both of these things. One is your ecosystem is expanding. You're using more
Mhm.
and more tools. You have all of these assets. And so everything from your website to your social media platforms to your CRM, your email marketing, assets for your affiliate programs, your course and membership platforms. You get more and more, you start building up more and more of these tools and assets,
Mhm.
and it can feel overwhelming trying to apply
Mhm.
your brand cohesively across all of those assets.
Mhm.
And then the other thing that might happen is your team starts growing, whether you're
Mhm.
hiring external contractors or you're hiring internally. Suddenly you're managing people who are also in a way brand, and
Mhm.
either they're brand ambassadors or they are working with your brand and your business. And there is that opportunity to either solidify and strengthen that brand or potentially cause misdirection. And so those are two areas where it can feel a little overwhelming sometimes. But there are strategies to address that, and I think some of the work that you're doing does actually address how you um, cohesively apply your brand across the board.
Absolutely. Those are all great points. And yeah, I like how you put like the brand ambassadors, that they're, showing up, they're representing the brand. And then what about like the owner really feeling confident to show up as themselves in their brand? Because this is something interesting that I see is that especially as a business is growing and scaling, there's a little bit more risk
Mhm.
because the companies like achieve certain revenue milestones. And so I've seen, especially women as they grow and they reach new levels, suddenly there's this fear of like being too bold or being too this or too that, that they're going to like scare away all the clients and the customers. So what do you have to say about that? What are your thoughts?
I feel like what I mean, I think there's definitely some exploration to do there, but you should be setting aside some time to reflect and to analyze and to think about, are we reflecting, um, is the business reflecting the brand that we want to convey? Are we expressing
Mhm.
ourselves in the way that makes sense for our clients? And particularly if you're still evolving, your clientele is still evolving, or you want to continue growing, you want to always be looking at where are we now and where do we want to be, and is how we're showing up reflecting that? Are we able to capture the audience that we want to based on how we're acting and behaving now in front of them?
Mhm.
And so I think it comes down to clarity, really. it's it's
Mhm.
it's looking at everything that you have, and asking yourself, is there, can I lean into our brand personality even more?
Mhm.
Um, and if there is if that sense of fear is coming up, then it's doing a little bit of a risk assessment. What happens if I do into this? What's the worst that can happen? What are the
Mhm.
consequences that I think are going to, how is this going to impact my business? And just doing that little bit of risk assessment and figuring out, what are the pros, what are the cons, how could this impact me, can help you roll it out maybe in a way that feels safer to you. But
Mhm.
what ends up happening is when you're leaning into your brand values and your brand personality, your brand identity, it feels good. It starts to
Mhm.
feel more and more natural. And I think it becomes easier to run your business as a whole. And the fear starts to, you build confidence. You're basically banking confidence, and the fear starts to fade away a bit.
Yes. Oh, that is so true. And I agree completely that leaning in, it feels natural. It feels because it's who you are. Like the business, no matter where you take your company, especially for those that are in the coaching training space, and even big. When a company, I've worked with really big guru businesses, those businesses are still built on those foundational principles of when the business owner was just like a solopreneur. It was a small business and not as big as what it is today. So it's like we have to look at that, it being sustainable and then being scalable and something that can grow and evolve with us, and that also
Mhm.
something that our team can like show up and represent as well.
Yeah.
So it's really powerful to look at it that way. I recently read something about how like Ben and Jerry's ice cream, even though they've long sold the company, the business is still run on the core values that Ben and Jerry put in place all of those years ago.
Mhm.
And that's
Which is
something
it's a
really.
challenging thing to do. It's very
Yeah.
challenging to, I mean, even as, if you're the face of your brand and you start bringing people on, you know how challenging it is to keep that brand vision
Uh-huh.
aligned across the team. And so it's a very impressive thing to do. I will say it can be challenging if you think your brand identity is supposed to look a certain way,
Mm.
because you're looking at someone else and you think that I want to look more like that person
Mhm.
or that brand, and you start
Mhm.
imposing out yourself. There is going to be a little incongruence. I think you're going to feel
Uh-huh.
something is off, and we can start, if I believed that I need to be looking more like this person who's edgier or louder or cooler in some way, and my brand needs to look like that. um I'll end up forcing myself to behave in certain ways that don't feel right. And
Mhm.
people can tell, right? Like your audience can tell, your clients can tell when it feels off. So yeah, I always, I feel like giving yourself the space and time to just reflect and to look at, what actually feels right for me and for my brand. That clarity, once you get it, is so valuable, but it can be a bit of a tricky path to get to.
Mhm, mhm. Yes, yeah. So it's that copycat, and I know that that can also happen with coaching, where when someone has a mentor or a coach, and then they try to model the coach's brand and model what the coach does, and maybe they're getting sort of like the business system maybe from the coach, like the marketing and enrollment, but then trying to take their brand personality and their voice and copy them like that. I think that
Mhm.
creates a lot of incongruence. I know, like my current coach, we are so different when it comes to like our values and how we show up and like how we like to serve clients. And where there's things that I love about her and how she models, there's things that I just know that are very true to me that I need to honor and not
Mhm.
copy from her, try to do like her. And so there is a level of self awareness that I think is required. And then if we don't have that self awareness, that's when we're going to lean to experts like yourself to help us take that inventory about who we are,
Mhm.
what we aren't. And, these online businesses, like they didn't exist decades and decades ago. Like they're still relatively new. And so this whole concept of like putting yourself out there and writing copy and like and seeing what comes back and what kind of people are attracted and what kind of people are repelled, like it's still a pretty new thing that I think our brains are getting on board with being used
Mhm.
to.
I like how you approach this when you were talking about your mentor, though, and it's how I approach any kind of idea or inspiration. If you're noticing people around you. um, Pay attention to what you're like and what you're attracted to.
Mhm.
Pay attention to what your clients say about you that they love about you, and
Mhm.
document those things. Write it down, reflect on those things. Um, but especially when you're looking at other people, I would identify what you like about it,
Mhm.
and then look at how you might apply it within your
Mhm.
business and your brand. Because it might not look the same. Maybe what you really like, it's showing up in another business in a very particular way, but you can take the core value, maybe, or like the underlying trait, and apply it to your business in a very different way. And I think, like, I'm someone who's very um when we talk about brand archetypes, I'm a nurturer. I'm all about providing support. I will hold my clients' hands the
Mhm.
entire way. But also, on the other hand, I can be there. My people pleasing tendencies tend to come. It thrives in that kind of environment.
Mhm.
I love when I see that with other people. I really like people who are very funny. I don't know why humor, just really, I want to be funnier, but I know I'm not naturally a very funny person. And so I think about what it is that, for me, it's the emotional resonance. It creates this lighter
Mhm.
energy, and I want my clients to be able to feel that. But for me, it's not through humor. So how do I create that in the experience that I'm offering? And it's going to end up looking in a very different way. But just, I think, identifying what you like and what you enjoy, and
Mhm.
applying it to your clients at the end of the day, right? Because what you enjoyed isn't necessarily what your clients enjoy. But figuring out how to apply it to your own brand in a way that makes sense for you, it might end up looking completely different, but it is going to be so much more. It's going to be easy to apply, but it will make so much more sense for you.
Mhm. Yes, yes, that makes sense to really, kind of find what you like, what you don't like, get clear, and yeah, kind of like what is, maybe it's not the thing, like the humor, but it's like the essence of that. Like what is that essence that I want to create? So that's a deep dive. Like that's not something that most people are going to think of on their own naturally. And so that's why they have you to help them really do that inventory and get clear on,
Mhm.
what it is that they want and how they want to show up. I've really found that my brand and like how I show up online has really evolved as I have intentionally created more of a life for myself outside of my business. It's in getting away from my business because I was for decades. I mean, I've been running businesses for years. I was a workaholic. I just worked and worked and worked. I didn't know how many hours a week I worked or how long anything would take. And so in the last 2 years, I put time tracking systems in place and really started to identify more with like my gift of systems and processes and being very systematic. So that happened inside my business, but then that allowed me to start to focus more outside of my business because I knew how much I was working, how much I didn't want to work, wanted to have a life. And so my husband, we do a lot in nature and we get out and we like to go on adventures and travel and camp and do different things. And so in doing that, I found like, wow, I've got some really great content to bring back to like nature pictures and that I'm really starting to get clear on my values and who I am as an entrepreneur outside of my business. And when I'm in nature, I get ideas, just like
Mhm.
wisdom will come just land on my shoulders without me even asking for it. And I'll also lately in the last several months, it's like nature will teach me lessons about business when I'm not even thinking about it. I'll just look at something and then I'll see something and all of a sudden this like business lesson will come through. So
Mhm.
um I just wanted to bring that up because that's just been my personal journey of like really carving my life outside of my business to like have
Mhm.
more to create more of a brand and more presence for myself. And I'm just curious, like what kind of thoughts you have on that from your own experience, or working with all of your clients as well.
To talk about, well, I have the same experience. I started gardening a lot as well.
Yeah.
I think I started it as a way to feel closer to my mother, who I lost
Oh,
about a decade ago now. But
oh.
now I thoroughly enjoy it. But you're right. There's something about being in nature that first of all, just gives you, I think, it allows for space to think and
Yeah.
reflect, and you don't necessarily have to be thinking about business, but of course, I imagine you love your business. I love the work that I do, and so I am thinking about it a lot, and it is very inspirational. But the thought that I had was actually one of the questions that comes up with a lot of people I talk to is, I don't necessarily want to show people everything about my life. I don't want to show them
Right.
everything that I'm doing. For some people, it makes sense. I know a financial coach who, her Instagram account was full of posts of pictures of her and her family hiking and camping, and the thing is, that's the life that she wanted to create for herself, and she
Uh-huh.
wants her clients to get to really be able to feel it, to see that it
Mhm.
is possible for you to live the life that you want to live. For her, it is being out in nature whenever she wants to be able to drop her laptop and go.
Mhm.
um but it helps create, I think, this vision for her clients that this is
Mhm.
also possible for you, whatever that looks like. Maybe for you it's not traveling and it's not going out in nature, but whatever you want to do, I can help you do that.
Mhm.
um and for some people, that's just too much. It's too much behind the scenes. I don't want people to see my family. I don't want to see them what I'm doing when I'm not at work. But there's
Mhm.
still a lot that you can pull in, right? If you had, for example, an email newsletter, you can pull in those anecdotes. That's like, you
Mhm.
were out in nature and you had some thoughts about, you were reflecting on something that is
Mhm.
business related. That's something that you could
Mhm.
share, and that becomes
Mhm.
part of this brand experience that you are creating, especially if you do that
Mhm.
fairly regularly.
Mhm. Yes, yes, those are great points and more from like a tactical, here's how we can like use it inside of their business. So good. So this is kind of a hot button question, and I'm excited to bring it up because it's come up recently. So I have heard people online say, marketers say, well, having a brand is for like big companies only.
Mhm.
Like small businesses, they just can't afford, it takes too long. And I just think it's really funny. And I like to bring this question to brand experts because, like, what are your thoughts on that? Because you probably understand like where they're coming from, but
Mm.
also your whole business is built on helping people have a brand. So, what are your thoughts on that?
You have a brand, right? Like your brand is the reputation you built. It's how people think of you. What if, even if only one other person knows about you right now, your business has some kind of reputation. Someone knows
Uh-huh.
about you and they think about you in a certain way. And how we approach it would be very different from a larger corporation. So there's some things that we absolutely don't need. I think the way a lot of brand experts are coming out of agency world, and so they might
Mhm.
start offering their services in a way that's very similar to corporate work that they've done.
Mhm.
So you want to, I think at the end of the day, it depends on how much you want to curate your brand experience, or the brand
Yeah.
experience you're offering your clients. How much of that do you want to have control over? And you can absolutely do it yourself. They can be overwhelming, especially as a growing business.
Yeah.
I find it, you're just too close to your own business. I mean, I could apply the same things to my own business. I could do, the brand blueprint. I could do the strategy session for myself. I have attempted it, and it's
Uh-huh.
not the same because I am too close to my own business. It's just so much more helpful when you go to someone who's outside of it and
Mhm.
doesn't have any real stake in your business. They just want to support you and like give you
Mhm.
clarity. Um, but there are some things that you might not need. You might not need, depending on the business that you're running and what assets you have and how you want to apply your brand strategy. You might not need um, you might not need multiple logo variations, for example. You might
Okay.
not need, how many people have received I know so many people who've received, they've done a brand refresh, and then they get this brand book, or a lookbook, essentially, their guidelines for how to apply your brand. For some
Mhm.
businesses, that makes sense, but if you're not selling products, it might
Mhm.
be overkill. I would talk to your brand strategy expert, the person who's working with you on your branding. It might be, it could be your copywriter, it could be
Mhm.
your content writer, it could be your the person who does your social media marketing, for example. They're usually working from some kind of foundation.
Mhm.
Um, and so I would talk to them about, what does my business really need? And
Mm-hmm.
how do we get just what we need and not the overkill, because
Yeah.
there can be too much. So what's
Uh-huh.
right for your business?
Oh yeah, yes. That I really appreciate that perspective. It's like let's not go above and beyond, cuz I know that there was a client that I worked with. It's been a few years, but they invested big, 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 big money in a branding company, branding agency, and I mean, it was six figures. It was a six-figure
Mhm.
investment, and what they got out of it was they didn't get the ROI on it. I think they got some landing pages and a brand book and different things. And I remember the
Mhm.
owner making a snide remark about it, like, "Oh, because we'll ask, hey, when we're building out their sales processes and things, hey, can we see your brand, if you have a brand guide and brand voice
Mhm.
guidelines and copy guidelines, and like, oh yeah, we'll send you this, we paid $100,000 for it," or it's just sort of like this offbeat remark, but there's a little bit of
Mhm.
bitterness there. So I have seen that happen
Yeah.
before. And yeah, it's really interesting. So just it's like the basics, what you need. And I agree with your team too. I know for me, it's like I will ask my team, like, what do you need to be able to accomplish this task? And so what
Mhm.
I've really found is, when it comes to our internal teams kind of representing our brand, like I do have like a brand guidelines document that I use, but one thing that's important is like industry knowledge. And I find that
Yeah.
if you're getting into team members that maybe they're great at like what they do, but they don't have a lot of industry knowledge, our processes and what we provide to them needs to have more education for them to
Mhm.
understand, or we need to be training them more on the education side.
Yeah.
But if they have a lot of industry knowledge, it can just be like the basics of like,
Mhm.
here's the info, just make sure it matches this.
Yeah. I think it could be helpful to think about what your business needs, but also creating SOPs. I mean, especially at your stage of business, you should be thinking about, do I have some kind of documentation at least so
Mhm.
that I can hand information over to someone else, and they're going to understand this the same way that I will. But also recognize that brand building does take time. It is something that
Mhm.
is ongoing. It's happening all the time. To build
Mhm.
if you are shifting your brand reputation, for example, that is going to take time. Your brand is going to evolve. So it could be helpful to, even document what does it look like for our brand to be in alignment,
Mhm.
and what are the signs that it's no longer in alignment and we need to rethink, strategy or the expression. So, colors, logo, all of those things. At
Mhm.
what point does it start to look like we are no longer in alignment and we need to update our thinking about it, or how just the assets in general, our branding in general.
Right, right, because they can get outdated. So we wanna so do you recommend like a certain amount of time, like a 1-year check-in, or like them checking in on their brand assets at a certain time period, or is it just more organic?
I think it depends on your
Uh-huh.
business. If you're creating a lot, so if you have lots of programming coming out, if there's always something happening in your business and there is a lot of change, or you're bringing on a lot of people, you might want to look at a shorter period of time. So maybe that looks like every 6 months or every 12
Okay.
months. For some people, if your offer is pretty much it's solidified, there's not a lot of change happening, then
Mhm.
you can probably go 2 or 3 years before you even have to really think about it. So I would do,
Mhm.
at the very least, once a year, I would check in and just sort of look at the business as a whole and how does the
Mhm.
brand fit into that. Um, with Even if you're doing it more frequently than that, I think that the 12-month mark is a good place to sort of
Mhm.
take a step back, look at everything, and go, okay, what's next? And how are we going
Mhm.
to roll this out over time? Because that's the other thing, getting a refresh and updating all of your assets, it's going to take time. And so you want to be able to plan that out and not go into it feeling overwhelmed.
That's a great point. So putting a reminder in the calendar and doing that annual check-in. And that can be really woven into, if they check in on their SOPs annually or any sort of type of other
Mhm.
annual review, to see if that's something that needs to be prioritized in the coming quarters. So tell us a little bit about your services. I heard you mention them, but let us know how, especially if somebody really they got a lot out of this conversation, they're curious and want to learn more, your services, and then where we can find you and connect further.
Yeah. And the way I would start with anyone is a brand strategy session. It's called a brand blueprint, and it's 90 minutes generally of us sitting down and doing a deep dive into your business and your brand. So we talk about what you've tried so far, where you are right now, and where you want to go. And then we identify the top 3 to 4 opportunities you have to elevate your brand. So that's the starting point. But what I did this just for you. Your audience gets this first. I developed a quiz. So it's called a brand archetype quiz, and it helps you identify your primary brand archetype. So how your brand is showing up in the world, or how you want to show up, so that you're able to then use that information to help help develop the rest of your brand. So once I mentioned I'm a nurturer, and so that's really how that informs how I develop all of my pieces, including my my lead magnets, my email marketing, my content marketing in general. How my web, eventually I'll have to update my website. That's going to be based on my archetype. It's just a starting point, but it helps, I think, helps you get a little clarity instead of getting overwhelmed by the whole piece. You can find me at thedesignist.studio. I'm on Instagram most frequently, but I'm also on LinkedIn as Ruha Ratnam.
Okay, great. Well, we will have the links for the quiz and your website and your social media in the show notes and in the live stream description, so people can come and connect with you further. Thank you so much for all of your insight. I thought that this was a really illuminating conversation, and it really helped me see your thought process and how you work with clients, and get an idea for just different ways that we can see our brand and interact with our brand, and also some tactical things that we can do as well, from those annual brand reviews to those, risk assessment, internal assessment, that the brand is really in alignment with where we are and where we're headed. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me. This is a wonderful
Yes.
conversation. Enjoyed
So
it.
happy to. And thanks for everybody for tuning in to More Influence and Impact. This is Celia Faye Meisel, and I will see you next